All right, Ms. Hines, go ahead and talk.
Okay, how is this party, How is this party, Mr. Feliciano?
Okay, it's not coming across.
I need a lot of fuss in the background. I guess that's coming in.
If I could have your attention, please, we'll be starting in 2 minutes.
Okay, so what might I need to do now? I took it off speakerphone.
Okay, that sounds perfect.
If we don't, I'm going home.
It does?
Yes.
It's what I said just now. Sounds great.
Yes.
Okay.
So go
Okay, well,
ahead and do what you can listen in speaker mode, and then if you want to talk, go ahead and turn the speaker mode off and hold it to your face.
okay. So speaker mode is off, so I'm speaking with you.
Sounds good.
So when I'm not talking, turn it off. Is that correct?
Turn the speaker on, so you can put it down and listen.
Okay. All right. When I'm speaking. Okay. All right. Well, with you being my helper, as usual, I'm sure we get it right. And
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I guess you can call me in on, I think, on the
Good morning and welcome to this informal board meeting of the Savannah Chatham Board of Public Education on Wednesday, February 3rd, 2021. We welcome everyone who is joining us virtually. I announce, as I always do, that indeed no actions are taken during informal. We use this as a time to get information and get more input from others so that as we make decisions later, we're making better decisions. I would say to anyone who is watching us this morning that Ms. Hines, board member from District 5, will be joining us via the telephone. She is still recuperating, and so she will be on with us in that way. And as we begin today, I would want to welcome Dr. Lawton Davis, the District Health Director for the Coastal Health District. Dr. Davis is probably the busiest man in this part of the state right now, and I particularly am pleased that he was able to take a few minutes away to be with us this morning. Dr. Davis, welcome.
Well, sorry.
That's why you're busy.
Can't make it be quiet. Good morning, and thank you for asking me to be here. I'll try to make some brief comments and cover several things, and then be open to questions. As far as the numbers game, I've given you a handout, and if some of you are on my distribution, so you've probably already gotten today's update. But as of this morning, we had 16,764 confirmed cases in Chatham County, 298 deaths, with I think 14 of those reported in the last 2 days. Statistically, women constitute a larger percentage than men, but when you look at the deaths, there are more men than women, just again proving that women are tougher than men. That's pretty much true in throughout medicine. If we look at the handout just for trends, the first at the top is the new daily case rate per 100,000. And again, just as a reminder, the red zone with this theoretically is at 25. We peaked back in the summer at 46.7. We almost matched that, a couple of weeks ago. And it looks like we're beginning to trend downward a little bit, which is good. And the 14-day community transmission index, same picture. Remember, 100 is the level at which the governor says you can adopt a mask ordinance, and we're still at 555. And on the back side of that handout, you see the 7-day rolling average, which again just follows the trends of the other two. And then the percentage of tests that are positive. Last week it was 14.5. This week it's 10%. So still evidence of some significant community transmission. Wanted to touch on the vaccine. That's the big news. We were lucky to get the first doses in the state of Georgia. I'd love to tell you it's because I'm such a wonderful person and our public health team is so great. But actually, I think it was location, just as it is in real estate. The feds were trying to get it into Florida. We happened to be on the way to Florida on I-95, and we happened to have the freezers. So we'll take all the credit we can get, but, I think that had as much to do with it as anything. But what I want to touch on is the vaccines themselves and their safety and efficacy, and try to offer some reassurance that the reason these two vaccines were brought to the market so quickly was not because of shortcuts in testing of safety or efficacy, but they were able, I'm sure you're all familiar with the bureaucratic paperwork that goes on in the background to make anything happen in documentation. And Operation Warp Speed, has gotten a lot of positive and negative press, but one of the good things it did was allowed large companies and corporations to cooperate, collaborate, what we would ordinarily call collusion. But they were able to do that and get the testing done and bring these to market very quickly. So each of the two that we have, Pfizer and Moderna, are very effective, and the safety data looks very good. We've had very few significant reactions. We've administered roughly 32,000 doses in the Coastal Health District so far, and we've had one or two significant events. And quite honestly, sometimes we're not sure if it's anxiety or if it's a true reaction. But so I think as far as your team and your staff and offering them assurance, these things seem to be pretty solid. And none of us have grown a third eye, and the vaccines don't have microchips that get inserted into you or anything like that. They're very safe. And also they are effective. You can read various numbers, but they seem to be at least 85 to over 90% effective, especially in preventing severe illness. Will they work as well against some of these new variants that are out there? A lot of that remains to be seen. They seem to be effective against B117, which is, of course, one of those that people are concerned about, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. There are some other variants where they may be less effective. The beauty of the technology behind these vaccines is that they have the production line in place. So if the virus changes and they need to change the vaccine, all they have to do is change the little genetic code that they're making, the messenger RNA, change that to match the new virus, insert it in the same process, and you're off and running again. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. So that allows for a great deal of what we call vaccine agility. And actually, Johnson & Johnson should have that same benefit. They could change it pretty quickly if they needed to. So really right now, vaccine supply is the issue in completing the phase we're in now, which is 1A plus. The plus being everybody 65 and over. We have a lot of providers in Georgia who've enrolled to be providers, but because of the limited supply coming into the state each week, many of these people have not received an allocation to be able to administer it. And, that's just it's a math question or math, it's just mathematics. We get less than 200,000 doses into the state in a given week, and that has to be spread, around the state. So initially, it was a problem of supply and not having enough people to administer it. But now we have plenty of people who are willing to administer it. So as soon as we can work out the supply issues, I think things will go much more quickly. And hopefully Johnson & Johnson will be approved in the very near future. And as you're probably aware, it's a single-dose vaccine. So if you get 1,000 doses of that, you can immunize 1,000 people, whereas if you get 1,000 doses of one of the others, you can really only do 500 people. So in our local situation, as far as school-age kids, I can tell you that many of the private schools, or most of the private schools, are in person, and we are seeing a lot of activity and cases in the private school system, and a lot of quarantine and a lot of sports teams, et cetera. What I can't tell you for sure, though, and my suspicion is that much of that spread or transmission occurs outside of school, in the home, socializing after school. But we do know that sports teams, particularly holding indoor practices and face-to-face practices and other associated activities, is associated with a lot of the spread as well. I know there have been studies, and there's talk and an initiative to have schools reopen, and I think that's all well and good, but I want to just throw one cautionary note out here. When we read that in-school transmission, is not a great risk factor, that is true if mitigation processes are in place and are strictly followed. I gave you this handout, but I'm going to read it so the people out there can hear it too. The study quoted in the CDC in Wisconsin that showed very little transmission in the school. This is what they did to mitigate the spread in the school. A number of infection mitigation measures were employed at the schools. They received funding from a foundation. The districts purchased 2 or 3 layer cloth face coverings for all students, and all students received 3 to 5 masks as a result of this grant. All schools were under district and statewide mask mandates during the study period. Students were asked to wear masks when within 6 feet of another person outdoors and at all times indoors. A classroom cohort included students from 1 grade level who avoided mixing with other students and ranged in size from 11 to 20 students. All classes and lunch periods were held indoors. Schools attempted to seat students near the same person within their cohort, if possible. Staff members were instructed to wear masks, maintain a distance of 6 feet from all other people, if possible, and limit time in shared indoor spaces. If a student was excluded from in-person school because of COVID-19 symptoms, that student's siblings also were excluded from school. No symptomatic COVID-19 screening was conducted in the schools. So they were very strict with their social distancing in the school. They required 100% mask wearing with either 2 or 3 layer masks, which they provided. And if one kid was positive, the siblings had to stay out also. And so I think it's demonstrated that it's possible to have students in school and limit the amount of in-school transmission, but I think you have to be very vigilant, and it's not necessarily an easy thing to do. And I think I'll stop there and then just see if you have questions. If there's something I didn't touch on that you want to hear about, I'll try to either answer it or make up an answer.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. I have Dr. Hoskins-Brown, Mr. Katchmar, and Ms. Grabowski. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate having you here to give us context on what you're presenting. One of the questions I have is about the incidence of transmission from the studies that have looked at international transmission in return to school. And I'm wondering, some of them, they're doing meta-analysis, so they're going through all the literature for all the studies of transmission and comparing them to come up with a rate of passage from teacher to student. Do you know if they are looking at the student-teacher ratio or the mode of instruction? Like in some countries, the mode is you have a school with a class of 50 kids and you have a very traditional lecture in the front. And some schools, like what we do here in our district, we have everything from Montessori to group instruction, that sort of thing. Do we know if any of the studies are taking into account the difference in the interaction between teachers and student and instructional models?
I can't give you an answer, a specific answer to that question. What I do know is that socially distancing and maintaining that space and wearing a mask, inside works. There's in some places in Europe they were able to go back to school and documented the same sort of thing that we alluded to in the Wisconsin study, and in North Carolina as well here in the States. But in other places, I think it was in Israel, when they went back to school, they were in a heat wave. Everybody had to stay inside. They were running the air conditioner, and they had a huge outbreak. So I think it has to do with the safety factor has a lot to do with a lot of mitigation factors, including, improving ventilation, and wearing the mask. But to specifically answer your question, I can't. I don't know.
Thank you.
I have Mr. Katchmar and Ms. Grabowski.
Dr. Davis, like Dr. Hoskins Brown, I appreciate you being here, and thank you for your ongoing collaboration with us and help for the Coastal Health District. My question is about the vaccines. I know it's a supply issue. We are going to consider a resolution later today to ask the feds and the state to accelerate school staff in the prioritization for vaccines as they become available. Do you have any information on what the state of Georgia is planning on in terms of prioritization once we get through phase 1A and into subsequent phases?
I've not heard anything specific, and so and Governor Kemp hasn't called me in the last day or two to ask my opinion. But if I'm reading my tea leaves correctly, I would be surprised if the education system isn't either at or very near the top of the next category.
That's good.
Thank you.
I have Ms. Grabowski, Mr. Johnson, Dr. Brinkman.
I actually had a very similar question to Mr. Katchmar, so thank you very much for being here and for the information.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, did you have your?
My questions were already answered. Thank you.
Dr. Brinkman.
Dr. Lawton, thank you so much. I've read this study a couple times, and they've got numbers in there about their per 100,000, but they really don't ever state what the CTI and what the community spread really looked like during this data collection time point. Am I reading that correctly?
I think you're correct.
Yeah, they really don't tell you what their community spread looked like. I love to read research articles, and when you read a research article, you're always trying to say, oh, does this research article actually line up with the group that I'm trying to look at? So firstly, I don't know what their community spread was. So is it applicable to what Chatham County's spread looks like? And these aren't questions for you. This is me pontificating now. The other big problem with this study is it's in rural areas. Last time I checked, Chatham County was not a rural area, and the demographics of this student body was 92% non-Hispanic white. Again, not an apple to apple for Chatham County. So while this is a great study and a beginning of the iceberg, it's only on the top of the water, and a study that would be similarly describing what we have going on in Chatham County currently doesn't exist.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Howard Hall.
Yes, there's a more contagious strain of COVID-19 that's recently emerged in South Africa. It has been samples found to residents of South Carolina. And this variant is believed to be, of course, more contagious. So what impact would that have on vaccine, the distribution of vaccines since there's another variant out there that's more contagious and causing more people to get sick?
That's the $64,000 question that we all wish we could answer right now. I think that many public health experts at the national level fully anticipate another surge in COVID related to B117. It took it about 2 or 3 months to become the predominant strain in the UK, and a lot of people are anticipating that it will do the same thing here. We don't know for sure how much of that is around. And what happens, a percentage of positive tests from certain locations is sent to reference labs to be genetically sequenced. If you just do a test, it'll test, yes, COVID-19, but there's no quick test that differentiates B117 or P1 or P2, which I think is in Brazil, from one another. It's positive. To tell the difference, you have to send that specimen to a reference lab, and then they have to genetically sequence the DNA or the RNA in there to tell what it is. So you take a specimen, be optimistic you get the results in 2 days. It's positive. That happens to be one that's sent to California to be tested. It takes at least a full week to do the sequencing. So by the time we get it back, we're 10 to 14 days out before we know that we have a B117 in Chatham County or in Low Country, South Carolina, or anywhere else. And if it's 1.5 to 3 times more contagious, the likelihood is that it's already spread. So the take-home message is I would assume that we have it, and I would assume that it's out here and spreading. There's no reason for it not to be. Again, the good news is that our current vaccines seem to be pretty effective against B117, maybe less so against a couple of the other ones. So I can't tell you exactly what the impact is going to be. I can only tell you that there are the people at the national level anticipate that we will see another surge related to this.
Dr. Davis, I have a question. You mentioned briefly athletics and athletic programs. Could you expound on that just a little bit? In my opinion, we have had to deal with the issue of our students playing against students that are not necessarily doing the same things we're doing. And just comment, if you would, sir.
Sure. Well, if you think about sporting events or athletic events where people are in closer contact with each other and breathing on each other, wrestling. I've never understood, football and having a center and a guard bumping into each other on every play, or a guard and a tackle, and, sweating and probably cursing at each other, and blah, blah, blah. I played football. I know how that goes. So indoor events with indoor practice, the risk of transmission, you're breathing harder, you're exhaling more aerosol, you're coughing, yelling at your teammates and yelling at the opponents. And it just seems to be a perfect recipe for spreading the virus. Now, if you're outdoors running cross country, playing golf, playing tennis, and maybe there probably would be ways to have football practice outside that would be pretty safe if you're not lining up in, face to face. So I think outdoors would be better than indoors, but, anywhere they've looked, there've been more transmission in sporting events and going to and from sporting events if you all pile on a bus together. And then your point that if Chatham County happens to be being very vigilant and separating, but then you go and play County X and they're not wearing a mask and they're, not doing, practicing good public health hygiene measures, yes, your team is much more likely to be exposed at that event. So I can't quantify it. I can't pull out a big study to show it, but it just fits with the pattern of spread we've seen everywhere else.
Thank you, sir. Are there other questions from board members?
Dr. Bob,
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Hines, go ahead.
I'd just like to make a comment. Dr. Davis, thank you for continuing your sharing of information with us concerning this virus and the numbers. My comment is that we must continue to follow the guidelines, wear our masks, social distance, staying away from crowds, as we've been told for months now. Even though this is not 100% surety for elimination of the virus, but we must continue working to lower our numbers, and we just hope that this virus will soon move away from us, and as soon as the vaccinations are available for everyone, that everyone will take the vaccination, and we can get back on track and more or less move along with life as normal. But right now, our numbers are not at the points we would like for them to be for everyone and all the children in our schools. And we must remember our school system is very large, and we have limited space and space areas for the children to be socially distanced. So thanks again for coming, for sharing this updated information with our school board and our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. Dr. Davis, we appreciate your being here. I would just want to tell you in closing that my wife and I were able to get through to the health department, and
We're lucky.
we tried several times, but we had a lovely day to get there and stand in line for a few minutes and have our first shot. And I applaud what y'all are doing for us, and wish you well as you continue to fight sort of overwhelming odds in many ways. But thank you so much for taking time to be with us today.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your questions. And I wanted to add one more point that you made very well. When we're looking at mitigation strategies to prevent spread in school, all of the studies talk about the necessity to support those same mitigation practices in the community, because you really need to limit it in the community as well. So you can't just do it in the school. We need to do it, we're all in it together, so to speak. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. As board members, as we get ready to move on, just as I guess a housekeeping kind of thing, since we were here last, we've added quite a bit more protective plexiglass for us. I honestly, from where I am sitting, can barely see Ms. Grabowski and Dr. Howard Hall. When the two of you want to speak, if you would just hold your hand up, I think I can see that better than the rest of you I can see. And I'm used to watching you wink at me and nod at me and smile at me when you're ready to talk. But I can't really see those two right there. So if you'll do that, I would appreciate it. Ms. Hall.
I'd like to take a moment to thank Ms. Kegler and Maintenance and Operations for putting these additional security measures in place. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. We appreciate it. Next on our agenda is a DAS report on stewardship of human resources. Mr. Ray.
Yes, good evening. Afternoon, good morning, rather. You have the Steward of Human Resources report. Just wanted to.
I cannot hear you.
I'm sorry. You have the the Stewardship of Human Resources report. Just wanted to go through this with you. Everybody hear me? Just want to make sure that we go through this. I want to try to make sure we are looking at it. So we annually, based on the strategic goal, to build professional capacity in order to achieve a premier student-focused workforce. You can see the rates that we have. That's based on our baseline and targets. So where are we today? As you can see, our attrition rate dropped, but you understand about the pandemic, and certainly it's an aberration from the standpoint that it's not normal. We haven't been this low since 2016, and actually it was lower with the last economic downturn. So it wasn't as bad as the last time we had a economic downturn, but certainly you can see the result of the attrition that we have here. You can see what happens with the school administrators, other administrators. School classified staff was higher, and you can also see how the other classified staff was. So certainly, we can draw some conclusions. It's just that the pandemic, we still have the same type of attrition to some degree, but our classified staff were a little bit higher that are in the schools than normal. Wanted to show you what the state report is, which is the MASPA, mid-year school personnel analysis. I give you this every year too, just to give you a statewide comparison, to give you a viewpoint of what's going on compared to the state. So they use a different criteria in that they are still looking at attrition. Even if somebody were to transfer from one position to another, they're counting that as a person leaving. So just you have to take the data with that kind of context when you're looking at it. But it does give you the comparison to the state, does tell you how we are compared with non-renewable certificates, with special ed, experience levels. You can see any of those different types of variables as well. And SPED is also, special ed teachers also included in those numbers. A few points I want to make, unless you have any questions at this point on any of those, the first two. Any questions?
Questions of board members?
Okay. Want to go through a few other items just to make sure you're aware of some of the other things we're doing in human resources. GTAP, as you know, we restarted our GTAP program. We have a the Teach Savannah Learning Academy. We had 17 completers in December. We had a wonderful event for them. They were the first ones to get through the process, and certainly we're excited that our GTAP program is actually moving forward. We currently have 63 staff members enrolled in that program. So I certainly thank the board for your support that occurred 2 years ago where you endorsed us moving forward, because now we're training our own again. And so that is just, you started with 17, now we have 63. So, we're moving forward and we're able to help our own teachers. We have 318 alternatively certified teachers in process of getting certification. So that just tells you the overall need compared to what we, like I said, with the economic downturn, at one point we had less than 20 staff members that were alternative certified, I think of 2010, 2011. So certainly we're getting back to that point of needing to fill our positions and finding ways to make sure we fill the positions that we have. And so this has been a great help to internally be able to certify our own staff. Wanted to also, you just received a handout. Just wanted to kind of highlight some of those points, because some of the things that were brought up related to that. Staff exit trends, there were some questions about, are we losing more teachers at this time of year than normal? And you can see, based on that we're not. You can see that at this point, we are just, with the information that I passed out, our trend is 217 in 2017 by December 31st, 261 in 2018, 250 by 2019, and 185 by the time this year. So the reasons for people are leaving, we certainly have a lot less people leaving than normal, and you can see the categories of certified, classified professional as you're looking at that as well. Vaccinations. The vaccinations, these are the ones that we know about. So these are the ones that formally came through us related to requests for 1A, which was the first group that were first responders. And you can see the campus police and nurses, the number that we have. We have 37 campus police, 31 nurses that have received at least one dose of the vaccine. And we have our therapists, which are occupational, physical, and speech language pathologists. We have 35 that are willing to take it and in that planning stage of taking the vaccine. So some of them may have taken it, but that's just where they are right now. They haven't all taken the first dose at this point. We are working hard to try to figure out, we've communicated to our 65 and older group and also caregivers of 65 and older. We're working on a plan to try to make sure that we maybe have something internally where they're able to go get the vaccine, not just through the health department, but we have the outreach that we've been doing since the beginning of January to that group that are in A1+, but we also know that many of them haven't gone. So we just did a survey that went out on Monday. We'll find out more information from our internal staff that are 65 and older or our caregivers about the need, because maybe they weren't able to get in, maybe they weren't able to get an appointment. So we want to try to make sure we have an opportunity within the district to be able to do something for them. So we're working through that process, and hopefully we'll have that in the next few weeks where they're able to get the shot, the vaccine on our campus, or at least through a process that related to the school system, as we did with the therapists, the campus police, and the school nurses. Also provided information on the ADA and FMLA requests, just so you can see where we are with that and how many we have approved at this point, how many have been denied. The rescinded are the ones that put in a request and then decided that they didn't want us to do anything about the request, one way or another. And then you can see the ones that are pending. Pending meaning that they submitted a request, they were informed that they needed to submit documentation back, but we haven't received the documentation back. So they could come in any day, or maybe not. It's an open-ended point because there's no limitation on when they can submit it, but we do have to get it to make a decision. So I just want to make sure I provided that information to you. Any other questions?
Questions of Dr. Howard Hall?
Yes, thank you for your presentation, and I'd just like to share just a little snippet from an email that a teacher sent. They were concerned about some things, and I won't read the whole thing, just one little part. It said, after reviewing previous board meetings, it has become apparent that HR is not being transparent with our board representatives in the discrepancies that they are choosing to enforce these two situations: those with personal health issues and those supporting medically fragile family members. In addition to this, at the recent workshop, meeting the representation from the family members from HR presented that there were currently 186 pending cases of ADA FMLA exemptions, but continued to make it sound as if the individual employees were at fault for not following through on these. So my question becomes, how are you reaching out to those who are still on the list that's pending? Because
Well, the ones that are
some
pending,
miscommunication
we haven't circled back to the ones that are pending, other than reaching out to them to ask them if they have other information. We can't make them submit documentation. As it relates to the criteria that we use, ADA requires us to look at the individual person look at every situation individually, and we're doing that based on the person. So yes, if they're caring for somebody else, that's not part of the ADA criteria that we're looking at. We're only looking at self. And so yes, that is a concern, because there are employees that want to be able to care for others, and that is something that is falling on the FMLA side, that many employees don't want to go the FMLA route, they rather go the ADA route. So it's a choice that employees are making in some cases, but I get the perspective that an employee has, and certainly sympathize with that. I understand exactly what they're concerned about.
Right. When it's a child, special needs, you have a special needs child, and they're having to use the FLMA as opposed to the ADA. It's just causing a lot of discrepancies within the staff.
And we can review. I'll review that again. We have again our ADA assertion or ADA look. What we look at for ADA is the individual person, and that's the law. There is a exception within the law to look at other circumstances, but we narrowed it to the employee is what we're doing at this point in time. We're leaving FMLA as it relates to anybody else that they're being a caregiver for. But I understand, Dr. Howard. I certainly will speak with legal and communicate with the superintendent about the concerns about those individual employees.
Mr. Katchmar, and then Dr. Hoskins-Brown.
Mr. Ray, I appreciate your further explanation on that issue. And I'm going to say this knowing that personnel matters are ultimately the province of the superintendent and staff. Given where we are in a pandemic, I would just encourage us to recognize that the ADA and FMLA are floors. That's the minimum we have to do. We can do more if we want to. There are a lot of practical implications about doing more. I would just encourage us to try to be a little more flexible where we have family members where the employee doesn't neatly fall under the ADA or FMLA, but there are still significant practical concerns related to extended family, et cetera. So I would just encourage us, to the extent it doesn't significantly impact operations, or if you can do it on a school-by-school basis and maybe some people can still work remotely, just take a deeper dive in some of those cases, and to the extent we can be flexible, given that it's a pandemic, it might be something to think about. Ultimately, how you all handle that is your call. I'm just throwing my 2 cents in. Thanks.
Dr. Hoskins-Brown.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the information. I have a question about the attrition rates on the bottom of our actual report page, Stewardship of Human Resources. The rates have gone down for school administrators and other administrators, but have increased for school classified staff and other classified staff. Are those two percentages dominated by a particular position title?
It's a good question. I need to look at that. I do believe that we do have more custodial issues that have occurred this year, certainly with our vacancies and unable to fill them at a larger rate than normal. So certainly I think that the impact of custodians are in this mix. And so I can certainly drill that down and get that information for you.
Thank you. That would make sense, and I was wondering if it was custodial staff or if it was bus drivers. So thanks, I appreciate that.
Well, bus drivers would have been in the other category, which is other classified. So if you're looking at for the bus drivers, they would have been in the other category,
Right.
the bottom.
So other classified is up. Well, it's down from last year, but it's up from 2016.
Right.
So that 14% may be, that's bus drivers?
Correct. Bus
Okay.
drivers would be
And then
in
the
that group.
16.8 might be custodial, but you're going to look into it?
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
One last.
Any other comments from board members? Hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Ray. I appreciate it. Next on our agenda is the interim financial statement. Ms. Nathaniel was going to do that. How are you? Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. The financials that you're looking at today are for December 2020. We're in our second month with our Munis conversion. It's been fun. We are reconciling accounts. We're taking this opportunity at this point to to just look at our financial systems and our financial reporting. We're converting our general ledger accounts to match the state. And as we go through our conversion, we're doing a lot of classes. And this month and this week, we're actually doing reporting. So I said all of that to say that the reports that you see this month are like the ones you saw last month, but hopefully with our report training classes starting tomorrow, the reports that you see next month will be even better. We're at the half-year mark for our fiscal year and at 40% of our school year. Our general fund revenues at this point, the property taxes that we've collected are at 60% compared to 57% last year. Overall revenue, we're at 55% of budget, which is higher than our 53% that we collected last year at the same time. For our general fund expenditures, our energy expenditures are at about 43%, and that's 43% lower than budget, which is lower than we had last year at 64%. Teacher salary expenditures are on target at 39% of budget. Our para salary expenditures are lower at 32% of budget compared to 42% last year. Our overall expenditures are at 40% compared to 43% last year. I'm going to take you to a graph of our tax collections. And you can see here that, that we're trending nicely with our tax collections. Another area that we spend a lot of time comparing and trying to make sure everything's in line is our general fund balance. Here's a graph of our cash flow for the next 12 months. Based on our projections and where we are now, we're looking really good as far as our numbers concerned. We dip low September, October, November, which is normal for us because those are lower collection times for us. But we believe we will be in pretty good shape. Our goal at this time is always to try to have 2 months worth of operating funds available, and that's at $74 million. So you can see, looking at the numbers for September, October, and November, we're go as low as $52 million, but we're right back up there in December. Do we have any questions at this point?
Are there any questions? Ms. Grabowski.
Thank you. This is a specific one to energy and may cross over a little bit into Ms. Miller-Kegler's field. When we are doing energy improvements at schools in particular for lighting or HVAC, are we tracking by building the change in energy usage to be able to monitor the efficiency of those upgrades and improvements when they're made?
Those numbers are being tracked by our maintenance and operations area. Yes. Yeah, and yes, we're going to ask Ms. Kegler if she would explain some more for you on that.
Thank you. And I want to think that we may have shared a system that we have the option to go in and track and generate reports to allow us. And if you remember from some of the most recent previous board meetings where we brought before you the energy savings with the program with our LED lighting, so we do have the opportunity to break it down by building, and that's what we want to be able to see to make sure that we're capitalizing on that guaranteed savings as well. So we did share that link to the program that we use, and we want to be able to probably give you an update as we continue to progress to see what those numbers look like and how we can go in and track that progress, because there is a guaranteed savings, so we're making sure that we are reaping the benefits from going to an LED lighting program.
Thank you.
Mr. Catchmark?
And I'll just add to that more broadly, I don't think we've updated it in a while, but we have tracked our energy cost per square foot, particularly with all the new schools we built in East Bluffs, and it's dropped significantly. And we track it by square foot, we track it by dollar per kilowatt and all that, so we have that data.
Correct, and that's a part of our district accountability. One of our key performance indicators is that we bring that information forward.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments, questions from board members? Hearing none, we thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here to help us this morning.
Thank you, sir.
I have no other business for the informal, do we? We will adjourn from the informal. I would like to ask the board to, as soon as we can clear the room, to come back into executive session prior to us eating lunch, so that we can get that out of the way, and then you're free until 2 o'clock. If you want to take a quick break right this minute as we clear the room for the executive session, feel free. But to our viewing audience, we will go offline now and move into executive session after I have a motion, and then we'll come back in at 2 o'clock. Yes, ma'am.
I move that we move into executive session for personnel, real estate, and other legally binding matters that happened during that time.
Thank you, Dr. Hoskins Brown. Is there a second by Mr. Johnson? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you. We will go into executive session, and it's 11:49. We'll go into executive session exactly at 12 o'clock, please.
Okay. All right. All right.